So in this video, we're going to build a real-time chat application using Stream, which is an API and SDK to build in-app real-time chat and video experiences. We're going to build this with NextJs, Tailwind CSS, shadcn, Clerk for authentication, and Stream again for providing that real-time API for chat. Maybe in a future video, we add real-time video to it too. For this, we only have chat. So let me show you what we're going to build together, and then we're going to dive into the code and actually build this together. So here's our chat interface where you would have different channels or chat groups or conversations here created. And a little nice sidebar here that goes back to the home page. Most of these components are provided from Stream, and this is what makes it very easy to build such an interface with drop-in components that already come in built in with hooks hooked up to the APIs that communicate with Stream in the backend to provide these conversations. You can create a new conversation. For example, here I'm going to create a new conversation. Let's say Team YouTube, and then I'm going to select. You can pass in a channel image URL so that it shows up as the image, and then you can select the users. This is a nice search combo box using shadcn that opens up. You can select who you want to have this conversation with and then create that channel. This channel gets created, and now you can just start the conversation here. Hey, YouTube. So we're going to go through the components that you can use in a Stream, but also I'm going to show you how to customize these components, whether you're working directly with the APIs or through the component props that most of these components provide. You can pass in your own components to add in more functionality. So let's dive right into the code. So if you're going to start from scratch from a Next.js template, if you're going to expand on this Next Clerk template that I have, this is set up with TypeScript, Tailwind CSS, shadcn, and Clerk authentication. If you're not comfortable with Clerk authentication, there's a video on the channel. I'm going to include a link in the description where I walk through setting up this very template, which is using Clerk core version 2 with the middleware to add authentication and user management to your Next.js app. In this video, I'm not going to focus on the authentication part. There are videos on the channel where you can learn that. But we're going to basically, if you can see here, this is a template. You can use this template to create a new repository inside your own repo, then clone it down to your local machine so you can work with me. So let's call this Stream Chat. Let's create this repository. Once this is created, I'm going to clone it down inside my local dev so I can start working on it. So let's copy this and close this up. I'm going to come back here and say git clone. I'm going to select the current working directory because I've already created this Stream Chat. I'm going to go pmi to install all the dependencies. I'm just going to, from a high level, show you the project setup, and then we're going to get started with implementing Stream into our app. Okay, so pm dev. So let me just show you what we have here. Again, simple setup, what you get out of Next.js with the layout. All we have added to this is the Clerk provider that wraps the entire app to provide the user and session context. We have this pattern of providing some context or React context provider inside of our app through this providers component. Again, if you're not comfortable with this, watch the video that I mentioned, linked in the description. This pattern allows us to bring in a client component that we can use, for example, for providing a theme context, in this case, also a toaster provider, which is a toast notification provider from shadcn called Sonar. This allows us to show toast notifications here and there in the app that we want. So the provider is this, and this wraps the entire children, which are going to be your page components and nested layouts. Common question is, if we put this use client and wrap the entire app with it, does this mean our entire app is now client side? No, it isn't. You can pass in server components two client components as children without affecting them or turning them into client components. If you import a component here, you cross the boundary and it will become a client component. But if you pass it as a children, it literally is just like a slot that you plug different components in, and it does not turn your server components or your entire app into a client component. So this is from a high level what we have. Now for our authentication, we need to set some local environment variables. I'm going to create a .env.local, if I spell that correctly, so local. Now I have this .env.example where you have what you need to set up, and we're going to build upon this. We're going to have our API key from Stream as well added to this. But you need your Clerk publishable key and your secret key here to work. So you can reference the example to just know what you need to provide here. I'm going to go ahead and provide my environment variables, and then I'll come back. Before I go inside your Clerk, I've already created this real-time chat and video application. If you don't have any account, sign up, and then you can create projects. Now from here, you can go to configure. In the first page, when you create a new project, it shows you all the API keys you need and a simple little step to bring in Clerk into Next.js. But if you are on the same page that I am, you can go to developers and then API keys, and this is the environment variables you need to set, publishable key and secret key. So I'm going to paste this in and be back. Okay, so I've copied my environment variables. I have the project running on localhost 3000. So let me close the deployed version already and see if everything is working correctly here. Okay, so this is our template. We have some protected routes and an API route, which is again protected. Just to show you again this from a high level, we have this protected route just to show how Clerk works in your client components and server components. I've provided some examples here. We're not going to use these routes here. We're going to have a chat route or path, and we're going to protect that. And the way that you would protect it is inside your middleware. So if you go in your middleware, this is the new Clerk middleware. And any route that you need to protect, like this protected, you can just create this route matchers. Excuse me. So you can create this route matchers, yep, like so. So you can say is protected route. Apologize. So you can say is protected route. This create route matcher function. You can pass an array of paths here. So for example, I can say I also want my chat path to also be protected, or anything that comes inside protected and nested paths inside of protected. The way Clerk middleware works now in version 2 is that it does not protect all of the paths by default. This used to be the case in version 1. Now you need to specify which paths you need to protect. So using this create route matcher, it gives me back a function. I pass in the request object. This determines whether or not the user is on that path. And if it is, I'm going to get this auth function that's passed to Clerk middleware. And on it, I'm going to call the protect function. Now, this is going to check to see if the user is signed in. If they are, they can go through. If they're not, it's going to redirect them back to the sign-in page. Now, instead of this, you can also manually check to see if they're signed in or not using the auth function from Clerk and create your redirect URL and use the next response to redirect the user. This function just does that automatically, so you don't have to manually do that. So all I had done here is to just add this chat also to my protected routes. So let's actually go ahead and create that path. So inside of our app, I'm going to create a new folder called chat. Inside of it, I'm going to create a page .tsx. And then here, I'm going to create a function component. Let's call this chat. And then for now, let's just return a section with some padding, with a div, with a container class, and an h1 that says chat page for now. So let's close this off and that one. Let's also go to our header and actually remove all these other unnecessary links we have inside of our header and just replace one with chat. Let's say this is okay. You know what? Let me just comment this out for anybody that wants to use it afterwards. So I'm going to comment this out and I'm going to create a new link. Let's go to the chat page. And let this say chat, save up. Okay, so this chat is going to take us to the chat page. We are not logged in, so we are forced to log in. I'm going to select an account. This needs to turn me back into the chat page. Okay, so the basic stuff is working. Now let's go to stream. And I've opened up the documentation page here. You need to sign up for an account. You can get free application up to 25, I believe, monthly active users, or maybe 100 API calls. I'm not sure. You can read the pricing and the documentation for that, but you can create an account and an application with some free usages. I guess you can create 20 different apps and each one gets 100 monthly active chat users, which is pretty extensive. It definitely is enough for you to test and try, or even maybe build small applications with. So I've already created an account. You can go ahead and create yours. And we're going to walk through how we would want to do this. Now, inside of the docs, you can go to the chat messaging section, and there is React specific SDKs. Primarily, there's two different SDKs. One is this UI components. So these are different components that you can use to build your chat experience. And there's also this client, which is your APIs. So you can use the components that already come in the React SDK. It just makes it so easy. We're going to go through a short getting started tutorial here to see how easy you can add this. Or if you don't want, you want to build everything from scratch, you can use the APIs on this page, which is literally telling you how to create a client, how to create a user, how to authenticate your users, how to set your app up, how to create a channel, different channel types, how to query your channels, how to create messages, moderation, events, webhooks, and everything that you would need to build a custom app. You can have it here. But for now, we're going to go over this UI component or the React SDK that allows us to just drop in some components. Even the components, they allow you to customize them in great length. So we're going to customize our channel list as an example so you know how to go about it. There's also this tutorial. So once you get started with this, this is pretty small. So let me just make it bigger maybe. I hope this is readable. So this just walks you through getting started and all different components that there are. There's also this tutorial which is going to walk us through setting a simple little app in React, and this is what we're going to do step by step, and then we're going to build up on it. Now, I'm assuming you're following up with a React with a Next.js app, but if you want to do this, you can also do this in a React app using build. So using Wheat to build your app. So we've already done this because we're already working with Next.js. So there's two clients or two packages that you need to install. Stream Chat, which is a JavaScript SDK, and the Stream Chat React, which is the component SDK. So let's just stop the dev server here. pm add these two packages. Okay, so we need some credentials to be able to connect to our account on part of the stream, and then to be able to authenticate users, to create channels and conversations inside of our app. And the way that we're going to do this is by providing a token to our users. to authenticate from our backend using a server action. I'm going to walk you through that setup in a second. Now, when you wanted to create a client setup, as I mentioned, you need your API key. So let's set this up, or actually find them first, and then we're going to set it up inside of our app. So here on the overview page, you can see there is app access keys. There is a public key. This is your API key. And then there is a secret key. You need to bring both of them into your app. So let me just copy this into our .env.example so you have a reference of what we need. So we're going to have an stream API key. This is a public key. So you need to prefix it with next public so you can also access this on the client side. And you have a secret key which needs to stay on your backend. This is where we're calling stream from our backend inside of a server action. And this is where you would need your secret key. So I'm going to set up my credentials and we'll be back. Okay, I've copied my credentials. And now back inside the documentation, you can see to create a client, a stream client that allows you to actually call the API endpoints inside of a stream. It's basically a wrapper around different methods and API calls that you can make through a stream. You would need your API key. You would need a token for an authenticated user and some user data, and the required information is their ID. So we need to pass in our case, the logged in user, because we only want our chat to be available for logged in users. So I need to have a way of passing this user data down when I'm creating this client. And I need to have a token. Now, if you scroll up in the documentation here, it talks about creating tokens in development. So if you want to avoid having to authenticate the users, you can just go ahead and use this JWT generator to create tokens. You can give a user ID and this creates a token, and then you can hard code the token here, then pass it to this. But this is not for production, so you're not going to be dealing with just one user or use this way of generating a token. We want to have a way that they can dynamically generate these tokens. And the way that I'm going to do this from a high level is that we're going to authenticate our users using Clerk. And once we have an authenticated user inside of this chat page, we can create a server action that is going to call Stream API from the backend, pass this logged in user, and get a token back so we can forward to this chat application. So therefore we can create a client. Once we have this client, we can render a chat component, which is a context provider that provides this client that everybody else now can use to do all sorts of good things to create those conversations to our chat component. So let's start by going to our chat page. And here, what I want to do is that I want to render, or I want to get the current user. So let's go user equals to, let's await getting the current user. This is a function from Clerk that gives you the current logged in user. I'm going to turn this into an async function. And if I don't have any user, I want to return nothing. This won't happen. And the reason why it won't happen is because we have added this page into our middleware as a protected route, which means, and the middleware runs before we are actually rendering the page, which means if they are on the chat page and they are not signed in, they're just going to be redirected to the sign-in page and they won't see this page. But for good measures, and also when we are passing this data down into our chat component, TypeScript knows that this, depending on this structure alone, without knowing anything about your middleware, TypeScript is going to tell you this user can be null. Okay, so we're going to create a user data object, and this user data object is going to consist of the data that Stream API needs from us. So let me just copy this code from here This autopilot just created stuff that I don't need. So I need an ID. If the user object from our clerk authentication has a full name on it, I want to pass that as a name prop. And then if it also has an image URL, I want to pass that as image to my user. Okay. Then I want to create a component. Let's create a stream chat component. .tsx. And let's have a component here. It says stream chat. Now this is going to expect this user data. And now here is where we're going to actually run this code to create or to connect to our stream. So let's bring this over here and let's just render the stream chat. Let's also import this. So inside of our chat page, what we are doing is we are getting the current user and we're passing it down to this stream chat component. Okay, so let's start building on this stream chat component. Well, first of all, let's create an interface for the props that this is going to receive. So let's type this over here. So it is expecting a user data with the ID of name, the ID of string, name and image can be also optionally provided as a strings. Now this needs to be a client component, so I'm going to say use client because we need context providers and React API, so we need to turn this into a client component. And what I want to do first is to create this client. So we're going to just call this, let's calm down and copy this code from the documentation. Now the use create chat client is a hook that you can use to create a client, but it also saves it as a context. So this is really a context provider and a hook that hooks into that context to be able to create a client and then share it with your entire component. So we need the user data. We have this user data passed into this stream chat. We need the API key, which is coming from our public API key that we just copied from our dashboard. The only thing that we need here is token or provider. This is a property that you need to pass in to use create chat client. Now you need to either have a token here, which is going to be the token for an authenticated user, which is going to now use this chat conversation, or you can pass in a provider, which is going to be the case for us. We're going to pass in a server action that is going to create a token dynamically for every logged in user in the backend, and then pass this to this use chat create chat client so that we can create a chat interface for the logged in user. Now, how are we going to do that? Let's create a server action inside of our lib. I'm going to call store this in actions.ts. Now we can mark this as use server. This is going to instruct Next.js to turn all of the functions here into server actions. I'm going to say create token. Let's close this off. Now, what we're going to do inside of this server action is to use the client or the server side server client from stream to create a token. Now to get this, let me just import this stream chat from stream chat. We can use this to create a new instance of our stream chat client. But this time I'm passing in my API key and also my secret. So this is only meant to be for your server, and hence the naming server client. So it's a stream client, but it's on the server. It's using your secret key, so it should not be passed to your front end. So return. What I'm going to return from here is to call the create token on this server client we just created and create a token for a specific ID. So I need to pass in the user ID here as a string. and this is going to return a promise of a string. And then I'm going to pass that user ID here, which is going to be the ID of the logged in user. So I have this create token now coming back inside of my app now. What I want to do is to create a callback hook so that I'm not recreating this function. So I'm going to create a function called token provider. I'm going to use callback from React hook so that I'm now recreating this function, which is going to return an asynchronous function that calls this server action we just created, create token, and pass the user data.id. So the user data was coming in from the page. This is from the logged in user. We're going to use that same thing, pass it to our create token server action. That is going to use our server-side client to talk to a stream API, pass in a user ID, get a token back so we can authenticate the user with our chat interface. So let's also get this hook. And now if I save, I have this token provider that I'm passing in. Instead of like a static token, I'm passing in a function that can create tokens anytime that's required through our server action. Okay, so now that we have our client, we can just say these two lines. Well, it's not going to show anything, but at least we get our first component, which is this chat component. Now, this chat component, let me get it from the stream. Okay, so this chat component, if you go back to the documentation, you can see in this getting started installation, it just walks through the same steps as we did. Now, this chat component is a React context provider that provides this client to all the other components, such as the channel list, the channel, the header, the message list, and message input. So it really wraps the entire app. And for each one of these components we're going to be using, there's a section inside of this first piece of doc, which is also linked in the description. They could just dive deeper into understanding what they're really doing. So I'm saying if there's no client, maybe return loading. This is where you can just show some loading. And then when we do have a client, we're going to just pass this to our chat. So let's save this up, go back to our application. Let's go to the chat. And now this should render without any errors. Or we are on the chat page, sorry. So let's refresh this. If I go to the application tab or network tab, really, and the refresh is working. What I want to see here is our WebSocket connection that we have to, is this running? The WebSocket connection that we're going to have to our Stream API. So we want to see that connection established. Sorry, it seems like I have throttling enabled here. Let's just go here and say no throttling. Just make this a bit smaller too. Let's just try to empty cache and hard reload the page. Go to the chat again. Okay. Okay, now the client is ready. And you can see down here inside of our network, we should have this WebSocket connections set up. There, as you can see here, up top, we have the WebSocket connections, and the chat client is now ready for us to implement more components to it. Okay. So before I go ahead with the rest of these components, let's actually do something else here. And that is inside of our deployed app. If you remember, we had the home page where we had this header and the footer, but when we went to the chat, we didn't have those layouts, so we have a different layout. Now there's two ways that you can do this in Next.js. You could use the uh, uh, route groups, which is going to allow you to organize your routes into different folders and give them different layouts. So you can have different route groups. One be the app, which doesn't have the header and the footer. One be like your normal routes, which have the header and the footer. What I'm going to do instead of creating two route groups is that inside of my providers, instead of wrapping the entire application, let me make this a smaller. Instead of wrapping everything inside of my layout with this header and footer, what I'm going to do here really is just return the children, and then I'm going to decide whether or not I want to include this layout inside of my providers. So I'm going to get rid of this. So comment this out and that out, and maybe just return the children from here. So I'm wrapping it inside the providers and rendering the children. Now inside of my providers, I want to do something else. I want to come back into that component that I had that wrapped in the entire application, and I want to create another function that says layout. Now this is a client component as we are in a client file, and I'm going to bring in my header and my footer here. And basically, if I am on the chat path, I don't want to return these headers and footers. I just want to return the children. I'm going to create a chat layout specifically to my chat pages. But if I'm not on the chat page, for everything else, we can just wrap it with the header and footer. So it does show the header and the footer. Now for this to work, I have to go up where I'm returning these providers. This is what wraps the entire application. So I just want to create this or wrap this with my custom layout. So it decides whether or not to wrap the children with this header or footer. So as you can see here with the updates on our chat page, the header footer is now gone. And I'm dealing with a blank slate to just have this layout, chat specific layout on this page. Again, you can use route groups for this. This is a feature in Next.js that allows you to have share different layouts between different groups. But this is also another pattern that I have used in this application. So going back inside of our chat and page, let's go to the stream chat. We don't really need anything else to do with this file, so let's just close that. And now for the rest of this tutorial, we're going to be working inside of this stream chat to build on this. Now, the first thing that we can do following up with the tutorial is to also use some core components. Okay, so let's see. Now, ignore this API keys and the user because we already have this passed into us from our authenticated user. Here we have a use create client. That's the same thing. And then here inside of this state, and then later on inside of this use effect, they're creating a channel. So you call a client. This is a client that you got back out of creating a client. Call the channel method on it that allows you to create a channel. There are different channel types: messaging, Teams, live streams, and not. They have different permissions and different settings for each one of this, depending on what's suitable for that type of channel. If you want to create a messaging channel, you can give it a custom ID or just leave this out and it will be automatically generated on the backend. And you can pass in some options. You can pass in an image for your channel, a name, and define the members that are going to be inside of your channel. Once you have this, you set the channel and then you pass it to this components down here. Now, what I want to do here, instead of having this, or maybe let's just render this first. So I'm going to return that. instead. Now, instead of creating a channel here right away and passing it to my channel, what I want to do is to use another component which is called channel list, which is going to automatically set this for me. So let's actually import this component from Stream. I'm sorry. So let's leave this filter out for a second. So we have this channel list. I don't think I am spelling it correctly. Let's import this as well. So this channel list is going to provide a list of all the channels. We can pass in some filters and options, and I'm going to go through that in a second. But once you have this channel list, you don't really need to set a channel on this channel component, because what this is channel component is again another context provider that provides the currently active channel. So this is what shows up inside of our app. If we look at it, let's go to the deployed version one more time. So this entire thing that you can see here on the right hand side, this is a channel component, not the channel component, but it's wrapped with the channel component that has the active channel. Then you are rendering a channel header. That's the channel header up top. It shows the channel name, how many members there are, and how many there are online. A message list, it's the messages that you have inside of this. So all the messages that you have inside of here. And then a message input. This is the input that you have down in the bottom. And then you're wrapping the whole thing with this window object that is just going to manage the sizes of these different components. So for example, I have a thread or a reply on this message. For every message, you can reply to it. And once you reply to it, it creates this thread, kind of like a mini channel on its own, where you can just type in your own responses here. So this window object is really managing this different sizes. You have the header, list, and input. Then you have the thread. This is if you are having a thread active, it's going to show up on this side by side with the window. So if I close this, you can see these are side by side inside of my active channel. Again, channel, just like the chat, is just a context provider that provides the active channel. Now, if you have the channel list, this automatically sets the active channel and passes that to the context that this guy is consuming. So you don't need to pass a channel, just like the documentation said, because I don't want to be creating a new channel for everybody that logs in. I want them to be able to create their channels themselves. So we're not going to use this use effect to create a channel. We're going to use the channel list to show a list of all the channels. Like you can see here, this is all the channels. And then whichever one is active, by clicking on it, this is going to be passed into our channel component. Now, you don't want to show all of the channels that there are inside of your app to everybody. You should only show the channels that this specific logged in user is a part of. And for that, you can pass in some options and filters to this channel list. So let me just pass these options. Primarily, it's the sort function. You tell it how to sort the channels. You tell it what filter you want to use to what channels to show, and some options. So let me provide this variables, and then I'll walk you through what they are. So for the sorting, ignore the TypeScript errors. I'm going to import them later. So the sort is just this object that says last message at -1. So it's going to sort the channels based on the most recent conversation. So if a channel has a recent conversation, it's going to show up top. The filter is just saying, I want to only get the channels that are of type messaging. And then this user is a member of. So down under the hood, they're using MongoDB, and this is how you would pass in filter objects or filter documents to MongoDB. I'm saying I want user data.id or this user to be in the array of members for those channels. So only show channels that this user is a part of. And then options, I'm just fetching 10 channels. They might have more channels. Just for the sake of a better performance, I am limiting the number of channels that I'm passing by. Let me just copy all the imports that we would need throughout so that we don't get these errors. And I'm going to explain as we walk through what imports there are. But for now, we are having different imports. We're going to install some of this. Let's just make sure that those are there. Now, we need a tooltip and a custom list container. So let's just comment this out. We're not going to use this for now. Let's comment this part out as well. And then also let's comment the emoji picker out. I'm going to explain what this is in a second. So we now have this component dropped in from Stream. As you can see, we have some information here, but it is not styled correctly. So let's go back to the docs, and here it tells you that you need to set some custom styles. So there's a style sheet that you can import into your app from Stream Chat React, and then you need to set some custom properties for your app or for your chat page to work properly. So we're going to also copy this inside of our global.css. Just bear with me for a second. So I'm going to go to my global.css, the layer base. This is what comes from shadcn. Under this, I'm just going to paste in some custom styles. So this is going to set the body height to 100%, set it to display flex, and then set some width for the channel list, for the channel itself, and for the thread once it is open. Now going back to our page, if we save this up, okay, we now have a better style. At least we can see different channels, but something is not working correctly still. So let's see what we have inside of our maybe layout. So let's go to our layout. Something is probably, yeah, this part is probably messing up our app. Okay, now it looks better. So I have this chat list on the side. When you click on it, it just shows the active channel on the right. There's that channel header up top. And there's this messaging body. And also down here, you can now type in different messages. It gets posted in, and everybody else would be able to see this in real time. Now let's add this emoji because the package comes with an emoji provider that you can use inside of your app. So let's go to messages. I think it's inside the messages, and then we would have actually not here. Down here you have this emoji picker. You need to install Emoji Mart because they're using Emoji Mart under the hood to be able to pass this package also to your app. So let me just add this to my project. Let's copy this actually, bring that here. This is using yarn. Let's just replace this with pnpm and add this packages to be able to also render emojis. So let me just comment this part back in, close this. In the docs, it tells you how to set this up. So you would need to call this function and pass it the search index, and then we're just going to pass this to our chat component. So we'll just refresh to see if this is actually installed correctly. Okay, seems to be the case. Now we need to pass this emoji picker to our channel. So we'll just go down inside of the channel that we have. We're going to provide it with this emoji picker. And now if I go back to my app and refresh, here we go. Now we have this little emoji icon that allows us to also pass in emojis as messages, as no chat interface would be completed without emojis. Okay, so we jumped a bit ahead, but we now have our chat interface with this chat list, with the chat, the header, and this is really all you need to create this chat experience. Now you can take this further, customize it in any shape or form that you want, but this is how easy you can create a chat application with different channels and different users, authenticate them through your Clerk user management interface, create tokens, and then bring them back into this chat. They can create new channels, and that's the part that we're going to expand on by allowing the users to create new chat, new conversations, connect with different users, or add multiple members to create a group chat of experience. So let's go back to the docs and see if there's anything else here. So add a channel list. This is what we did. Instead of having a channel, we created a channel list that talks about the different props you can pass in, the filter, the sort, the options to only show the channels that this user belongs in. And this is what they have added here. And then again here, similar to what we have done, they passed in the channel list and then remove that channel creation using the use effect to pass it here, as this channel list is going to automatically take care of the active channel. Now we also have theming, so you can pass in this CSS classes to the theme property of your channel to pass in light or dark theme, because right now if I go back and change my theme to dark and go to chat, I still don't see the dark version. So we can do this by passing in the theme object, and this is how I'm going to do it. So inside of my chat client, I'm going to use this resolved theme. This is going to come from our use theme hook. This is a hook that we have set up. This template comes with theme provider. Just as a refresher, if I go back to my providers, you can see we wrap the entire app with this theme provider from Next Themes package. And then you can use the used theme to get your resolved theme. And if I'm on the dark, I want to just pass in stream chat dark theme, and then otherwise the light theme. And now with this, if I'm on the dark version of the site and go to the chat, I can see the dark version of our chat interface, which is pretty cool. With just passing in some CSS classes, you can just get theming out of the box. Now there's more that you can do with this theming, specifically with CSS variables. There is a CSS variable almost for every color that they're using in their design. So you can go ahead and pass in your custom CSS variables. You can reference the theming documentation, but there's also references to all the theming or CSS variables available to you. So you can read the docs for that to customize the look and feel. But beyond that, we can also customize the components. So one way was to use the CSS variables to create some customization. Let me just close this. Now, the other thing you can do is to pass in your own components to this stream component. For example, here we're going to create a channel preview. This is the list of the channels that we are showing on the left hand side, and individual previews or individual list items inside of this channel list, and then the message component. So as an example, here we are creating this channel custom channel preview function. It is receiving all the props that the channel list preview item actually receives. So you get the channel, you get the set active channel, and from here you can just render whatever you want. On click, if you're setting this active channel function to this current channel, and you can have custom messages. You would use this use message context, which is going to give you all the messages, and then you can render the message however you want, which is pretty amazing. This hooks already give you the access to the APIs and underlying context to make it very convenient for you to create your own component. So if the CSS variables doesn't suffice, you can just use the hooks and the API under the hood to do this yourself. So they have changed this. We're going to, instead of this, we're going to use the channel list to actually create some custom components. But once you have your custom components, as you can see here, they are passing this custom channel preview to the preview prop. Now, all the props on this channel list or any other component that starts with capital letters, they're preserved for your own UI component. So you can pass in your own component. Here it's saying, hey, channel list, when you're rendering the list of my channels, for the preview for every list item, use this one. Okay, and the rest is just the same filters and whatnot. And then it's a hey channel for messages. So for every individual message you want to render in my message list in any active channel, use this custom message instead of whatever you have. Again, with this, you can just take it even a notch up by passing in your own custom components to bring in your own functionality. There's also this guide to create different custom components for attachments here, and that's pretty much it. At the end, it talks about emoji picker and emoji autocomplete. We've already installed the packages. We jumped a bit ahead by bringing this data in and passing it into our channel to also have this emoji. You can create live stream style chat app. I'm going to leave this for you to review, but basically this React tutorial is done for here. What we're going to do next is to customize our channel list. What I want to do here, just comparing it with our own app, is that we have this sidebar here, which is just a navigation, making it look nicer or making it look like the WhatsApp web app. So you can open up WhatsApp on inside of a browser and it looks something exactly like this with this sidebar. They're not hooked up to anything. They don't do much. It just goes back to the homepage here, but you can have a different sections actually pointing into different parts of your app, showing different groups, different users, settings and whatnot. Here I have the currently logged in user and also a chance for them to change the theme from inside of the chat interface. I have a search input here. It's not hooked up, but you can hook it up so that it searches different channels, it searches different users. And I also have this button here to create a new conversation or a channel that opens up this new model, takes in a name, image, and users and creates this new channel and then renders it inside of our list here. So that's what we want to add. So let's start by, first of all, customizing this chat list component. This is a component, this part of it is just what comes out of the box. And what I want to do is I want to customize this in that I want to show this up top of it. And then this part of it is just us adding a nav bar to the whole layout. So let's go to our documentation here. So this channel list component, if you click on it, it just tells you that this is going to query our Stream API for a list of our channels, depending on the filters and options and sorting that you're giving to it. It's basically running this client.query channels, and with this filter, sort, and options under the hood, and it's going to render a list of all of our channels. You could just go through this and read more about the different props that you can pass in. Now, in terms of customization, you have two props that you can pass into this component. One is a list and one is the preview. In the tutorial that we have seen together, they were passing in the preview component, which is every list item. In our case, we're going to pass in the list, which is the entire list, because I want to show something up top and a way for users to create a new conversation or channel. If you don't pass in these two props, by default, it's going to render the channel list messenger and channel preview messenger. Now, if you click on this components, they actually take you to the code for this very specific component. So they give you the code for the React components or the SDK. This is the Stream Chat React. This is the SDK and the channel list component. You can get inspiration definitely from the way that they are, the props that they're passed into these components and the way that they are rendered. And this is exactly what I'm going to do here. So let me just copy some code inside of a custom component. We're going to create a component called custom list container.tsx. Let me just copy some code and explain what we're doing here. We need some components to render the dialog later on. Let me just comment this out for a second. So what I'm doing here is that I've created this custom list container. It receives the props. Now in the docs, it explains to you that anytime that you're passing in your custom components to these props, they're going to receive all the props that the original components are going to receive. So I'm getting the props, I'm typing them just based on the documentation. You can see the typings here and learn how to do it there. And then out of this props, I'm getting the error, loading children and also loaded channels. This is just to render the shadcn dialog to open up a form. Let's ignore it for now. If there's any error, I'm going to return this error indicator, which I'm getting from, again, another component from Stream. And if it's loading, I'm passing in the loading indicator. And then down here, I'm just rendering or returning the children. Now the children are going to be channel preview messengers or the channel list items. So I don't want to do anything with them because by default, they have everything that I need. They show the avatar or the image for the channel, the name of the channel, the last message. If you have unread notifications, it shows up there. So I don't want to change that or customize that for now. So I'm just returning the children. So with this, if I go back to my app and refresh, you could see nothing really should have changed much because I'm just rendering this. And this I got from the docs. So I'm just literally rendering this div. You can see here with all the class names that it requires under the hood from the CSS that comes in with Stream Chat to render this children. So that part of it, I'm not doing much, so I'm not changing it. What I want to do is I want to add up top of this some form, some dialog component from shadcn that enables me to render that form. So let's add that part actually to this so that we can expand on it. Now, one thing I want to mention before we actually work on this part of the form, let me just comment this back in and these two parts. We need to install the dialog input and create this form together, which we're going to create in a second. But going back to our Stream Chat component, now we can, on the chat list, let's actually go back to our chat and let's just bring them on one page here. Now I want to have a custom list component and I want to have a custom list container, and another prop that I want to send in here is to send channel to list. So what this does is if you examine the props on this component, it doesn't have the loaded channels. If you needed to have the loaded channels for any specific interaction you want to create or customization you want to create, you can pass in this prop to send the list of all the channels down to this list component as well, because it doesn't do it by default. You need to do this to be able to get this loaded channels. I'm not using it, but if you needed to, this is how you would get it, by specifying this prop over here. So let me see if I have this custom component, actually custom container here. We need the tooltip function from shadcn too. So let's go ahead and install our shadcn component. So we need the tooltip. So pm dlx shadcn at latest. Let's add the tooltip. Let's go also to this page. We need the dialog and also the input. So let's do them both at the same time as well. So here I'm going to run the same command and then say input and then dialog. Okay, so let's close this off for now. And if I save this, okay, the only thing we don't have right now is this new conversation form. But before we create this, let's actually see what I have added. So this div is what I have added to what we had before. Now inside of this div, I'm rendering a header component. Inside of it, I have this div that has that chat. And then inside of this, I have this dialog, which is a model from shadcn. I have this dialog trigger, which just renders a button. I have this message square plus, which is going to be this icon you see here. And once you click on it, it's going to open up this dialog. I'm also controlling whether or not the dialog is open by these states that I can have inside of my custom list container. You can see dialog is open, set dialog is open, and also a close. And the reason why I'm doing this is anytime that I am submitting this form, because inside of this dialog content, this is what it's actually opening up inside of a model, I'm rendering a form. Now to this form, I want to also pass in on success to close this dialog once we have actually created the channel. So this closes it off. So nothing too complicated. It's just simply rendering a dialog. And if you want a reference to it, you can go to shadcn, and then inside the components, you can just search for dialogs in this list. And here you can see how to use this dialog. It's basically a couple of components that you can just wrap inside of this dialog and make this a bit bigger. So you have a trigger and then a content. You have also header and your description and the rest of the body of the dialog, which in this case, I'm just using it to render a form. So let's create this new conversation form actually, which is going to use React Hook Forms, Zod for validation, and server actions to actually create a new channel, to create a new conversation. So new conversation form.tsx. Now, if you're not comfortable with React Hook Forms and Zod validation and together with server actions, I have a video on the channel where I talk specifically about that. I'm going to link it in the description. So definitely watch that. I'm not going to walk through the details of the implementation here. From a high level, I'll explain what we're doing here. But if at any point anything in this process is confusing, reference the video that we have for React Hook Forms, Zod validation, and server actions in the description. So let's install Zod. We have some dependencies here. Let's clear this out. pm add Zod. Sorry. What did I install? Zoc instead of Zod. So let's remove that. add Zod. We need React hook forms and also this resolvers that allows us to use Zod with React hook form. So pm add React hook form, and then we have this at hook form slash resolvers. Okay. Now we need to create a schema. So let me explain from a high level what we're doing here, then we'll create a schema. So we have this new conversation form. It's receiving the on success that just closes the modal. For now, let's ignore the client and the users and what we're doing here. I'm going to explain what's happening there. But from a high level, we are rendering a form. Inside of this form, we have three fields. One is the channel name. The other one is the image URL. And one is a drop-down selector that the user can use to select users. Once you submit this form, it goes through Zod validation. And if it passes the validation, it calls this process form function that we have defined up top here. So the process form is actually calling a server action using the client that we have to create the necessary conversation between the users that we define. Before we dive in there, let's see what else are we doing in terms of rendering our users up top here. So I'm getting a reference to our client. Now, anytime that you want to reference this client that you created using this use create chat client, you don't call this again. This is meant to be called only once, and then you can use this use chat context to get a reference of that client instance. And what I want to do is provide a list of all the users that the user can select to add to this conversation, just like how you saw in the beginning. Here we have this select user. There's a list of all the users, and you can search for a specific user and then select them, or even select two, which is going to be shown here. Now for this, we are using a combo box from shadcn, so combo box. Now a combo box is actually the combination of two things. One is this popover component that opens up when we select here, and the other one is the command, which is going to allow you to search through a list here, as you can see. But I have added to this, instead of just having them as options like so, I've added checkboxes here so you can check multiple one of these different users. So I'm going to walk you through that user selector that's using popover and command, or this combo box from shadcn, in a second. But before I go to the implementation there, we need a list of all the users that are inside of our stream API. So for that, I'm using this client. So I got a hang of my client instance, and I'm calling query users on it. Now, if you remember in the beginning, I mentioned that there is a part of the documentation that talks about, that is basically all of the different, let's go chat messaging one more time. So inside of this React, there's this client. Now this client is just the API, all the APIs that you can run. For example, client and user. Let's see where we can actually query our users. So you can see how you can get an instance of your connection. So all of the API that you can run really is here. Managing users. You can fetch your users, update users, insert new users, or query users. So you can reference this at any point that you need to work with the API. And all I'm doing here is using the client and the query user to query all the users that are on the platform. And I'm passing in a filter here. I'm saying, give me back all the users who are not this logged in user, because I need everybody else. I don't want to show the current user itself here as well. So I'm getting everybody that ID does not equal to this client.user ID. Now remember, this client that we instantiated before has this user data. So it's for this user because we passed in the ID of this user and a token to authenticate them to create this client. Now this client instance is tied into that specific user. So therefore, I'm using that client instance and I'm passing in this user ID. Now this is the same as our Clerk user ID. So I could have just gotten a hang of my user inside Clerk and passed that user ID. That's what I'm going to be doing inside the server action, but you get the idea. It's good to know that this user ID also lives inside of our client instance. So I'm saying, give me all the users whose ID is not this guy or the logged in user, or it's not me. And the second parameter is just sorting them based on their name. Once I have the users, I'm going to set a local state of the users. Okay, so this whole thing is just to get the list of all the users inside of our Stream API. Now our use form again has the name, image, and the selected users as the fields. Now for the selected users, because I'm using a combo box and it's not literally input fields down there, I'm registering the field instead of spreading this over an input, just like how we did for the name. So for example, you call this register with the name of the field, you spread over, this gives you all the state setters and checkers and getters. But for the selected users, I'm just registering it manually. I'm getting the values of the selected users using this get values function that's exposed from this use form hook from React Hook Forms. Again, link in the description to a video that I did on this if any of this is not comfortable. So we get the selected users, and I'm creating two functions: add a user, remove a user. This is to add a user to our list, the members of our channel, or to remove them. So I pass in IDs and then I add them to the array of selected users, or in this case of remove, I'm going to filter my selected users and get the user ID out of it. And for the name, I'm just using this register function. For the image URL, I'm just setting the register URL. Now, just so from a high level, you know, these are rendering errors. So if any time the validation fails in the client side here, we're going to have ZOD errors, or React Hook Forms is going to expose these errors for us, which I have gotten back from the form state. It is going to have properties corresponding to the name of all the fields you have. So for example, name and also image URL here. So if there's any errors, I want to show them there. So for example, here, if I do not provide anyone, and if I hit create channel, it says you need a name. The image URL is optional. The name is also optional. I just made it required here. And you need to at least have one user. So these errors are to just show the error messages. The user selector, which we're going to look at in a second, also has this error button at the end, or error section, where if there is any errors regarding the selected users, we're going to render them here. Now, inside of this user selector, I'm passing in all the users that I fetched from Stream. I'm passing in the selected users array, which is the value I got out of React Hook Forms using this get values. And I'm passing in my two functions, the add user and the remove user. Now this use selector here, I didn't go quite there. So let me just go back. We don't have that component. Obviously, we need to create this. So we need to create this component. Let's create it together. So user selector.tsx. Bear with me for a second. So let's see what we're doing inside of this use selector. So it's receiving all of the users, the selected users, and two functions to add and remove. There's a popover, a trigger. The trigger is just this button that shows selected user, but it also shows the selected users if you have any. So if I make this a bit smaller and open this up, If I click on it, you can see it just shows the selected users, and this is what it's doing here. It just renders these badges of the selected users. So something fancy that I got from shadcn. So if you go to shadcn and go to examples, if you go to the tasks here, you can see this is the same filter that I'm using, and the same functionality of adding this little badge when you have selected something. If you go to 3 and more, it just says 3 selected. So you can reference the GitHub. This is open source from shadcn. All of these examples, or on the block page, there are different examples that you can copy the code for. If you hit this lift mode, it allows you to copy the code for that section, or go to the GitHub for these examples. This is where I got the inspiration of rendering a filter like that for my select users. And that's what is this trigger doing inside. And then for the popover content, I'm rendering a command palette or a command box component that allows us to search over our users and then select one to add or to remove, depending on whether or not this ID is already part of our users. So that's all we're doing in this user selected. Now we need a badge, command, popover, and separator for this. So let's just go ahead and pm dlx shadcn add latest. Now if you want to add a couple of components together, you can just hit add command without the specific name, and then you can go through this list and hit space for anything you need to install. So I need the badge, I need the command, what else do we need? It the popover, and also the separator. And that should be all we need here. And once you have all the selections, you can hit enter, and it is going to install those components for you. I already had the dialog. The command component needs to reinstall the dialog. It's asking me whether or not I want to overwrite. No, it's the same thing. So let's clear this out. Okay, so I have this user selector. Let me close the terminal. Let's see if there's any other errors here. Well, I see an error here for my React hook forms, and the reason why is that we need our schema to be able to define the shape of our form, infer some types from it, so that the TypeScript or the use form hook actually works correctly. So for this, I'm going to go to my lib folder. I'm going to create a file called schemas.ts, and this is where I'm going to define the schema for my form. So let me copy this, which is basically a Zod object with a name, an image URL that's optional, and selected users, which is an array of strings. And we need to have at least one member inside of this array. So minimum one, at least one user is selected. This is where we had the error shown if they haven't selected anybody and they wanted to just create a channel. So let me refresh this to get the schemas loaded here. I also have installed the Zod and resolver, so that should be okay. The only thing we do not have right now is our server action, which is create new conversation action. As I mentioned, once this passes validation inside of our process form, we're going to call our server action to create this conversation in the backend and then redirect the user back to this list. So let's see how we can create this. I'm going to go to my actions again, so lib actions, and now here we're going to create a new action that this time is going to create a new conversation. So bear with me for a second, and let's see what we're doing here. So let's bring in this schema from where we created it right now. So this create new conversation action receives the same data. This is the form data we had validated on the client side. We're going to parse them and revalidate them on the server side again. So I've used Zod to infer the types from here. Similar thing as what we did with the use form hook. We do the same thing for here. I'm going to make sure the user is authenticated. So auth is coming from clerk. It's just giving me the user ID. I can decide whether or not the user is logged in. If they're not logged in, they shouldn't be on this page, which is impossible because of our middleware, but I want to make sure that nobody else outside of my application can actually call this endpoint, because remember, server actions are going to create post API endpoints under the hood. And if somebody gets access to your specific ID that's created for this post, they can basically call this endpoint. You need to authenticate it or protect it behind authentication. So therefore, no one can just call this server actions without being authenticated. So if the user is not authenticated, I'm going to return an error message, which is going to show a toast notification on the client side. And then I will parse the incoming data with the same schema that I had to make sure that I'm still receiving the correct data. And if everything is okay, then I'm going to use the server client. This is the same client that we created before for creating a token, but this time I'm going to create a channel. So just like the same thing we were doing on the front end in the use effect, if you remember in the beginning of that getting started with React tutorial, it was creating a channel on the client side, but now we are creating a channel on the back end. It's the type of messaging channel. Again, there are different types. You can read the docs or reference them for different types. They come in with different specs that's suitable for that type of channel. We're giving it a name, an image, and for members, well, I've got the selected users inside the data or the form that I have submitted. But on top of those, I want to also add the currently active user ID. So whoever is creating this channel, they're also part of it too. It can be a world where I create a channel but I'm not part of. You can also do that, or make it so that they can select themselves too instead of the select users. The way that we have done it is that in the select users where they were where we were fetching the users, we eliminated the current user out of it, so they cannot select themselves. But inside of the channel, we added them here because they need to be a part of that conversation, whether it's with one person or with a bunch of people. Now, when you're creating a channel from the backend, you need to pass in this created by ID, which is the user ID of the logged in user. So I have all the members, name, and this. Then I'm going to call the create method on the channel. This is going to create this conversation or channel. I'm returning a success through to my front end to say the server action completed successfully. If not, I'm sending an error message. Now back inside of our conversation, this is where we are calling this server action to create this conversation or a new channel. If there is any error passed in from our server component, we're going to just show a toast notification and return. If everything is okay, I'm going to call the onSuccess. This is the property we passed into this component to just close the dialog because we're done. And then we're going to show a toast success notification to say channel was created. It automatically is going to pop up in our channel list. And then it will be on top because that's the most recent channel that we have based on the sorting filter that we have passed into our channel list. So let's see if there is any errors here. Seems like everything seems to be okay. The action is fine. The user selector, also we got the imported or required components for it. So let's go back here. We had this custom list container. So this is what we want to pass in to our channel. So we are basically saying, hey channel, instead of using your own list, use this list container and send all the channels to me. So let's save this up. We don't need this for now. We're going to add these sections and the toggle theme and the home icon when we add the side nav bar. Okay, so with this, let's just make sure that the app is running. pm dev. Let's go back to our local version. Let's refresh the app. Here we go. So we have that up top section with this button that we have. It opens up our modal. We can give our channel a name, an image URL. We can select the user. So let's actually test this and see if everything works properly. So let's say new channel. And let's just select, I don't know, this user. Let's create this channel. Channel was created successfully. That's a new channel, and say, what's up? And everything is working properly. So just from a high level to review or recap what we did here. So we created this stream chat client or component that we passed into our chat page. We created a client that connects to stream with this specific user data. We created a token provider through a server action that allows this specific user to authenticate with a stream. We then rendered the dropping components from stream that allows us to wrap our entire chat, provide some context, and wrap it around the APIs and some custom hooks that makes it very easy for us to create this chat experience. So for all we have customized is the list component that renders a list of all of our channels, like so that you can see on the left hand side here. And what we did here is that we first started by just returning what is supposed to be coming out of this based on the implementation from the docs. We are returning the children. The children is going to be this individual list items or channel previews as they call it. And all we did is to add this header component on top of this channel lists, where we could just render a dialog or a button really to open up a dialog and a form inside of it for us to create a new channel, a new conversation. Inside of this dialog, we rendered a new conversation form, which was using React Hook Forms, Zod, and Server Actions for validation and actually mutating data in the Stream API. We got first an instance of our client. We got all of our users so that we can pass into that combo box selector. So when we are creating a new channel, we can get or select as many users as we want. We then rendered our form with an input for name, image URL, and that user selector. Once they select the user, we call this process form, which in turn is going to invoke this server action that's going to create a conversation or a channel in the backend using this server client, stream server client that we created before, and then returns to close the dialog and then show a success toast notification. Now some implementation details for this selected users. Because of the combo box, we created these custom functions to pass into that combo box. So anytime that they select on a user, it's selected, added to our selected users, and removed from it properly. This use effect and internal state was to fetch the users and hold the reference of all the users here so that we can allow the user to create a channel with whomever they want. Okay, so far we have added this customization to our list channel for now. Now, the only thing that we are left to do is to just add that nav bar on the left-hand side. If I go to the deployed version, you can see we have this nav bar on this side that provides some navigations. You can also extend it to provide more options here, fetch the users, show the conversations and settings. So we can add that here. So let me just copy the part of the code that belongs to this. What I'm going to do right before my channel list, which is the component that's responsible for rendering this part, I'm just going to bring in this aside navbar, and let me just close this so you see what we're doing. So this is the component that I just copied. Inside of it, it just shows a nav, and I have this tooltip providers, just an extra step. This is again coming from shadcn examples with these example layouts. So all I have is this options over here. For each one, I'm rendering a tooltip. So if I hover over, you can see, excuse me. So let's make this smaller. Let's go to this and actually make this bigger. That's what I meant to do. So when I hover over any of these icons, you can see a tooltip shows. So that's the tooltip provider. Again, a shadcn component, you have the tooltip, you have a trigger, which is the button that we are showing, in this case a home icon wrapped around a link to go or take us to the link. And then you would have this, other than the trigger, you would have this content, which is what shows up when you hover. Okay, so these are just basically buttons or links with the tooltip. And then at the bottom, I have these two, which one is for our tools. Okay, here, not there. It's in the secondary navigation component we have here. The first one you can see is this theme toggle. It renders the same theme toggle button that we had inside of our header in the homepage. So it's the same thing that I am also rendering it down here. So you can change or toggle the theme from your chat interface. And then the user button, which comes from Clerk. This is just going to give you access to manage your account or log out of your account, all hosted from Clerk with nice components. And this is all we're doing here. So let me just close this off and go to our local. And now you can see I have this sidebar also inside of my local dev area. I can go to the home page. I can come back to the chat page. I can toggle the theme and everything works perfectly. The only thing that you can see on the live version is that I just replaced the content of this homepage with a hero section, which is something very simple and minimal you can do, and it's not the point of this tutorial. So that's a wrap for this video, folks. We used Stream APIs and SDKs to build this real-time chat experience. In my opinion, it's super easy and convenient to use this custom drop-in components, but you can also customize them using CSS variables or a custom component passed in, just as the list component that we have sent. If you want to take this further, you can use the APIs under the hood. As I showed in the documentation, there's APIs and webhooks and events that you can just use to wire up any custom interface that you want. But it just makes it super easy to add a real-time chat application with all of this already built in. The emoji picker, the messages, the sorting functions, the query functions, the read and unread messages. Now, if you test and try this with two different users, when one starts to type, the other one can see that typing state. You have the read and unread state for your messages. So it comes built in with a lot of goodies that it would take you, longer to implement on your own. But I would encourage you to look at it and do also take the extra step to customize this. I used the components from the SDK linked through the GitHub as a reference. So you have the component and you can see how they have written that component. You can just go in, maybe change it to Tailwind instead of those CSS classes and add your own functionality to it, but use the component SDK as your reference, just as we did here. And that's it. Maybe in the next video or a second part to this video, we're going to add the video also as a feature so that somebody can just start a video chat or a video call. It's again supported from Stream. It's an amazing platform and allows you to just sign up for free and have these different channels for free to test it out. Maybe we follow this up with a live streaming app or a video calling app. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions or if any specific feature you're looking to be built in the next part, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.